Anyway, welcome everyone online and in the Gompa here. And let's go ahead and start tonight, as we usually do, with just the recitation of a couple of prayers. Get that on the screen. Okay, so again, we'll do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. Just one time, even though it says three there, we'll just do it once. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And then let's do the short mandala offering, visualizing a vast pure offering that we're making to receive these teachings and receive the blessing so we can accomplish realizations of these teachings in our own minds. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then finally, our refuge in bodhicitta prayer, which we always recite the first time in English and then twice chanting the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar sho. All right, let's do a short meditation before we begin the class. Just give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit using the breath as our meditation object. So feel free to use whatever technique you prefer to use with the breath. And then we'll just try to keep our awareness with the breath. Whenever the mind wanders, just guide the mind gently back to the breath. And we'll do this in silence for a few minutes. And then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight's teaching. So I'll start meditation by ringing the bell here in the Gompa. So now let's take a moment to set our motivation for tonight's class. Let's do this by thinking about what I taught about last week. Last Wednesday, we started our investigation of this topic of the perfect human rebirth. And what we covered last week, one of the main points, was to see the value of this human existence that we have. Certainly, when we compare our lives even to those of animals in this world, those in the animal kingdom don't have the opportunity that we have to make this life very purposeful, very meaningful, to do something of great value with this life. So let's reflect on the three ways that Lama Tsongkhapa sets out that we can see the great value of this life and thus extract its essence, use this life well to create the causes for both temporal and ultimate happiness. So the first point does pertain to this temporal happiness, the fact that we can use this human life to at least create the causes for a good existence after this one. Because the mind is continuous, we will go on to another existence. It's important that we at least use this life to create the causes and conditions for a good existence that will follow from this, a life like this one, or even better than this one, having the ideal conditions for us to be able to progress on our path. This is the first level of motivation that we can bring to these teachings tonight, to want to be here at least to do that with this life, allowing us to have a continuity of good rebirths with good conditions so we can continue our spiritual progress. Just focus on that for a moment. And the second way we can find value in this human life pertains to the more ultimate results. There are two of those. And the first one is our own liberation. The Buddha taught a path for each of us to achieve our individual freedom from samsara, from the round of existence, to not have to take rebirth again, to not have to experience the dissatisfaction, the suffering of cyclic existence, and to attain the peace of nirvana. This too is something we can accomplish with this human life. So focus on that idea, that motivation to advance the intention for being here, to include that, not just to gain a good rebirth, but to be free from rebirth once and for all, and to taste true freedom in the state of nirvana. The other more ultimate result that we have, that we can accomplish with this time that we have in this human life, is the state of enlightenment, Buddhahood, where we go beyond our own freedom, imbued with compassion and love for all beings. We dedicate ourselves to their welfare, to achieving Buddhahood, enlightenment, going again past just our own liberation to this more far-reaching goal, the state of omniscience, where we will then be able to help all beings perfectly, completely, effortlessly, so they can attain that state as well. This is the greatest motivation we can bring to our time together. It's to use this time to plant the seeds, create the causes for our own enlightenment, so we then can lead all sentient beings to attain that same state. So kind of feel your heart expand to that level of motivation for this evening. So having looked at the first value, the more temporal value, the second, the ultimate goals of liberation and enlightenment, the third value to this life encompasses those. The idea is that there's momentary value. Every moment of this life is extremely precious and important. We can extract the essence at any moment. And the time we have together this evening for this class, we can create incredible causes for our own welfare and the welfare of all sentient beings. So continue to hold that most far-reaching motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, and make the most of these moments we have together tonight, every one of them becoming a cause for the ultimate welfare of each and every sentient being. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin tonight's class. So I don't know, Stephen, do you know how to hook up the system?
I know.
Okay. We don't have our technical assistant tonight. Oh, okay. Can you do that somewhat quietly? Yeah, it would be good to have it for the folks that are here so that we can have things online. Sorry, folks online, we're dealing with some technical issues here with Venerable Dundrup not making it in tonight. So we're going to work with getting the system set up. While he's doing that, let me go ahead and just kind of get us oriented in terms of where we are. Tonight and next week are the last two classes of this first part. Again, in next week's class, what I'll do is I will hopefully have time for a short review. I won't be able to go into a whole lot of detail, but one of the things as well is to kind of go into how the test will be administered for this first part. And essentially there will be about a 4-week break between the last class next week and the first class of part 2. And that's partly because I'm going to do a house sit and do a little bit of retreat at the beginning of May. My last night in retreat, I'm going to do the online class. That'll be the first session in part 2. That'll be on May 13th. But essentially from April 15th, next Wednesday, through May 13th, you'll have a bit of a break. And hopefully those of you who would like to take the test will have an opportunity to do that. So I just thought I'd mention that tonight. And then next week, what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about how that test is run, how you do it. It's not going to be a major thing for you to study for, I don't think. But anyway, I think it's a total of about 14 questions from the entire weeks of classes that we've had. And then you need to answer just even a portion of those, I believe. I can't remember the exact details, but I'll do that next week. So again, in this first part, we've been mainly working with kind of getting us into the subject of this Lamrim, the stages of the path. We're using, again, Lama Tsongkhapa's text. And we mainly talked in the beginning about the great kind of things in this text in terms of the author of it, who's said to be Lama Atisha, and we're looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on that. And then we're also looking at the greatness of the teachings themselves, the Dharma and the Lamrim approach, how it encapsulates everything the Buddha taught in a way that we can practice those teachings very easily. And we went on to actually begin our investigation of the teachings with the teachings on the spiritual teacher, the spiritual guide. And so again, that's one of the first 2 topics of the Lamrim for us to meditate on. And I won't go into that today. I'll go into that maybe a little bit next week. We talked a little bit about then how do we hold a proper meditation session so we can get the most out of our meditations on the Lamrim topics. And then finally, we went into this topic that we started last week, which is the perfect human rebirth, which is the second of the main topics of this first part that you can meditate on. Of course, you can meditate on all of this, but those are what are the more traditional meditation topics in the very beginning of the Lamrim, looking at the external condition of having met with these teachings through the kindness of our spiritual guides, and then looking at the internal conditions we've created of having this human existence through the force of our own past karma and so on. So that's the idea behind where we're at in this teachings, and Stephen's working on getting things set up. So I'm going to go ahead and start to share things, and then once we have everything online, then hopefully the folks in the Gompa can see what I'm sharing with all of you online. We left off last week on kind of actually, I didn't even cover this topic. I thought I had covered this topic last week, and we're going to cover it tonight. Anyway, you got a preview of it with the meditation tonight. The idea is the first topic was really identifying what it means to have this perfect human rebirth. What are the qualities that are imbued in this existence that make it so worthwhile and opportune? The second topic is what we're going to go into now, contemplating their great value, which again, we already meditated on, so maybe I won't have to spend as much time talking about that. And then the third topic is how difficult it is to get this rebirth. We kind of take it for granted that we have this human life, but it can actually be, very rare and very difficult to achieve. In terms of the note I have here on this topic of contemplating their great value, I mentioned that it's sometimes presented in terms of 3 points, as in liberation in the palm of your hand. And what I'd like to do is maybe just review those 3 points because we just meditated on them. In terms of the 3 points that we looked at in the meditation, the very first one was the idea of the temporal value of this human life, using this life to at least create the causes for another existence beyond this life. Okay? So is everything okay volume-wise? Is the people hearing me okay? It's okay. Yeah. No, we're getting some no's. Let's see. Yeah, because until we get the system set up, then I can put on this little guy, the microphone, and then, but it's okay now? It's better now? Okay, no. Let's see. Okay. Technical problems. I'm glad we have an extra class next week. So, um, so let me go ahead and I'll just continue to do the best that I can. Hopefully people can hear me well enough to get something out of what I'm presenting. So what I'd like to share then now are some slides I put together with How Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, this text by Pabanka Rinpoche, how it sets out these 3 topics. Again, he says this section has 3 headings, thinking about the causes for its being so hard to acquire. So again, whoops, this isn't what I wanted to share. I wanted to share actually the text itself. Let me go back to my Kindle, and I will get out of this and I will pull up. Is it on? Ah, it's on now. Let me see if I can get this on the sound. Sorry about this tonight. I'm gonna have to turn down this then. Can you hear me in the, you can hear me in the Gampa with the microphone? It's over the speakers. Let me just check and make sure that folks online can hear me. Can you hear me okay online? Getting a thumbs up? Okay. All right. Sorry for this technical stuff tonight. Okay, great. Let's go ahead. And what I want to do then is I want to share actually from, well, you know what? I'm just going to go through it. Again, this is what I was sharing earlier for those of you in the Gampa. Um, Again, where it says contemplating their great value, I've got a little note on there that there's 3 points in this. Let me just go through those 3 points that we did meditate on tonight. The very first one is the temporal value, which is the idea of gaining a good rebirth from this life. You know, all of my teachers have said for most of us, even though there is the tantric path in Tibetan Buddhism, where you can attain enlightenment in a single lifetime and even a short period of a single lifetime, most of us will probably need a number of lifetimes to attain Buddhahood. And so we need a continuity of good rebirths. Thank you, Stephen, for your work on that. Okay. So we have to at least assure that at the end of this life, we're going to have another opportunity like this one. So that's the very first value that we can extract from this life. It's kind of the lowest of all the motivations, and it's the lowest of what we can achieve, but at least to do that rather than squandering this life simply by enjoying all the samsaric pleasures. The second one is the more ultimate value of this life, and that had two elements to it. And again, we'll see some of this repeated in Lama Tsongkhapa's text. But the very first one is the ultimate goal of liberation. And by liberation, we mean individual liberation. The Buddha taught this path. It's again usually subsumed in what's called the Hinayana, that vehicle of individual liberation, where people attain their own freedom, their own state of nirvana, free from cyclic existence. They'll never take rebirth again by having removed all of the afflictions, the root of ignorance, and so on. We'll be looking at that topic in the next part of this in terms of how we go about achieving that state, as well as even how we go about achieving a good rebirth. Those are the main topics for part 2, which will start again in May. The more ultimate goal, in terms of the higher goal that we have within an ultimate value, is the attainment of enlightenment, Buddhahood, which is a state that goes beyond our own liberation, removes even subtler obscurations in our minds that allow us to become a Buddha, allow us to become fully omniscient, to where we can then help others to attain the state of Buddhahood as well. So that's the idea behind those two. The very first one, again, a temporal value, and then the ultimate value of those two states, liberation and enlightenment. The third one is this idea of finding meaning in every moment, momentary value, which is kind of an interesting thing to meditate on because every moment of this life is sort of rich with that opportunity. And every moment we don't use that life for that opportunity is sort of a wasted moment, is the message we should get from that to some degree. So we really should take these teachings to heart and try to do everything we can to use every moment of our day as meaningfully as possible. So that's the idea behind these teachings. Let's take a look at what Lama Tsongkhapa says. I'll get that back on the screen. Wow, I'm huge on the screen. If you engage in no practice of pure Dharma at all for the sake of lasting happiness, but strive your entire life merely to eliminate your suffering and attain happiness in this life, then you are like an animal, despite your fortunate rebirth. Since animals, oh, they did cover this last week. I think I did. I'm getting confused now. Did I cover this last week? I think I did because I think I left off actually at this other topic, which is the difficulty of attaining this life. Sorry, let's wrap up this little part just by refreshing our memory. I've gotten discombobulated tonight by the technical issues here. So there's a concluding thing to this section about the value of this life. In that way, think how this physical basis is highly meaningful, not only in terms of the final goal, but even temporarily. For with it, one can easily accomplish generosity, morality, patience, and so on, the causes of an excellent body, wealth, and all that accompanies a higher status. If with this very meaningful physical basis you do not apply yourself day and night to developing the causes of the two objectives, it would be like returning empty-handed from an island of precious jewels. This analogy of an island of precious jewels is often used. Again, there's more information, certainly some advice on practicing this in Geshe Sopa's text, pages 259 to 260, but I'm not going to spend much time going through all of those various details tonight. What I want to focus on then tonight, and sorry for jumping around here a bit, is this third topic. The third topic there at the bottom of the screen, contemplating the difficulty in finding them. If we reflect on this and actually gain some appreciation for how difficult it is to get this perfect human life, then we once more don't waste it. And we also make sure we create the causes to have this again, because the causes are somewhat rare. We're going to look at the difficulty in terms of a number of points. But the idea is if we don't really take that to heart, then we're going to take for granted that this human life is easy to attain. And we can just squander this one, we'll get another one right around the corner. And that's not how it always works, because of course we have to create the causes for that, as we're going to see. So let's go ahead and take a look at this idea of contemplating the difficulty in finding these leisures and freedoms and endowments, as we call them, the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments that we looked at last week, the qualities of this human existence that make it so perfect. At the bottom of the screen there, it says chapters of scriptural transmission says that beings who die and migrate to the lower rebirths, whether from lower or fortunate rebirths, are like the dust of the great earth. All the dust particles of the earth, if that's how many beings are in an upper state, and when they die, they end up in a lower state, or even in a lower state, they end up in another lower state. So the majority of beings are descending to the lower realms, to the states of animals and so on. We looked at some of these last week. While beings who are born in the fortunate rebirths, which are difficult to obtain, whether migrating from lower or even other fortunate rebirths, are like the dust taken up with the tip of a fingernail. Apparently, in one of the Buddha's sutras, his discourses, he did this. He was standing by the banks of the river Ganges or whatever, and he said, all those dust particles, all those sand particles that are all around here, those are the beings that take rebirth in the lower rebirths after having been in a higher rebirth or even in another lower rebirth. But then he took his fingernail and just picked up a little bit of grains of sand or dust particles, and underneath his fingernail, that's the number of beings who actually attain a good rebirth after having had a good rebirth. Again, most beings descend to the lower realms. So we have to, just in terms of numbers, come to appreciate that this life is actually quite rare. When we look at our world and see 8 billion human beings, those are not 8 billion perfect human rebirths, because they don't all have the conditions we talked about last week. They might have a human existence, but they don't necessarily have everything that would make that a life they could use meaningfully in terms of studying the Buddha Dharma. Continuing here, it says, if you wonder just why they are so difficult to find, the 400 stanzas, which is a text by Aryadeva, says, for the most part, human beings cling to the side that is unholy. Therefore, generally, ordinary beings surely go to the lower rebirths. This is just pointing out that most beings tend to gravitate towards non-virtue. We're not going to look at the non-virtuous actions until we get to the second part. That's one of the main topics in the set of teachings for the person of the least capacity, is to look at the teachings on karma and to avoid what are called, again, the 10 non-virtues. But as it says there in the commentary on this, most humans and other beings typically hold on to the side of the 10 non-virtues, and consequently they go to the lower rebirths. Again, these are everything from the most serious one of killing, all the way down to some of them that are more mental, that are not physical or verbal. But again, we'll go into them in more detail in the next part. So it says, furthermore, if you have to spend an eon in the hell of Avicii, the worst state of existence in the lower realms, for each moment of anger toward a bodhisattva and so on, we'll look at that. That teaching will come up at some point when we are going through either karma or the ones on patience. But having a moment of anger toward a bodhisattva is a very heavy action. And it says, for every moment that you have that, you spend an eon in that worst hell. Again, kind of meant to scare us a little bit, but just to get us to, engage in proper behavior. And it says, so then the bad actions accumulated over many lifetimes, which have neither come to fruition nor been overcome by antidotes, by our purification of those actions and so on, that we'll look at in part 2 as well, and are present in your own mind stream, will surely cause you to spend many eons in the lower rebirths. This is just kind of Lama Tsongkhapa telling it like it is. We've created innumerable causes to be reborn in these lower existences. So again, but just by pure numbers and by our own proclivity to engage in non-virtue, we've created the causes to end up in not so fortunate states. He goes on to say, if you definitely purify the causes of lower rebirths accumulated previously and close the door to newly engaging in them, then the fortunate rebirths will not be hard to reach. However, that is very rarely done. I mean, if we look at it, even for many of us who have met with the Dharma, have we abandoned, all 10 non-virtues? Have we purified, thoroughly all of our, past negative karma? It's a very difficult task to undertake. We're all trying to get our minds to move in a direction that's contrary to what we've done habitually since beginningless time. So this is a challenge. This is something that even those who have met with the Dharma may find difficult to fully engage in. But it can be achieved if you, again, follow the teachings that we're going to look at in the next course, the next part, particularly adhering to the law of cause and effect, karma, and refraining from the 10 non-virtues and doing your purification. You can avoid an unfortunate state. Again, about a third of the way down, it says, if you fail to do so, you go to the lower rebirths. And once you have gone to the lower rebirths, you do not create virtue, but continuously commit bad deeds, whereby, as stated in Shantideva's text, Entering the Bodhisattva Way, you do not even hear the name of fortunate rebirths for many eons. So I put a little note on that, and I couldn't actually, those verses are pretty easy to share. The verses that are from the Shantideva's text that pertain to this are set out in Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise. Again, I'm not going to go to the great treatise that much because it's the great treatise for a reason. It has a lot more teachings to it than what we are getting in the middle length text. But nonetheless, I thought it might be good to share those verses from here. So let me go to my library. I pulled this up earlier and I've got it highlighted. So there it says, engaging in the bodhisattva deeds. These are the verses that pertain to that. Shantideva says, with behavior such as mine, I will not attain a human body again. If I do not attain it, I will commit sin and never be virtuous. Again, we don't use the word sin so much. The translators of this text chose that instead of non-virtue. But the idea is that if we don't get a good opportunity like this, well, then we don't have much control over what we engage in, and we'll tend to engage in only non-virtue. The next stanza, if I do not cultivate virtue, even when I have the chance to do so, what virtue will I cultivate in a miserable realm, completely confused and suffering? If I cultivate no virtue and accumulate non-virtue, I will not hear even the name happy realms for a billion eons. Thus the Bhagavan said that this human life is as difficult to obtain as it is for a sea turtle to put its neck into a yoke, tossing about on the vast ocean. We'll see that analogy being used a little bit later in our commentary. If even a single moment's wrongdoing causes you to abide in the unrelenting hell for an eon, again, this is what Tsongkhapa was speaking to. If you have a moment of anger towards a bodhisattva, you could abide in the unrelenting hell, the hell of Avicii, for an eon. Well, it goes without saying then that you will not enter a happy realm due to sins, non-virtues heaped up since beginningless time. So again, it's a little bit of the stick. It's not a very pleasant thing to think about, but we have to bring that to mind when we're trying to make good use of this life, to see how difficult it is to actually attain a good rebirth. I did want to share this little bit that's in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise. It's not in our text. Remember that our text is a much more abbreviated version of the Lamrim. A qualm is raised. This is somebody who says, well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but when I experience the suffering of the miserable realms, well, won't I be then extinguishing previous bad karma? And then I will be reborn in a happy realm. Hence, getting out of the miserable realms is not that difficult. Well, Lama Tsongkhapa corrects this thinking. He says, while you are experiencing the suffering in the miserable realms, you are constantly accumulating new non-virtue. Therefore, although you may die in a miserable realm, you will continue to be reborn in miserable realms because you aren't doing anything to get out of that state. Because of this, getting out of the miserable realms is difficult. Engaging in the bodhisattva deeds, again, continuing with that text, it says, experiencing only the effects of that karma, you will not get out. While experiencing the effects, you create other non-virtue, other sins. So this is the idea behind it, is that, it's very difficult to get out of the lower realms once we have taken rebirth there again. It's not to say that it's impossible, because every one of us has been in the lower realms and made it out of the lower realms. But it's very, very difficult. We have to make sure, again, in this human life, we do everything we can to create as much virtue as possible, to abandon non-virtue, and then to, of course, purify the non-virtue that we have created. And of course, use this life as well as we can for the other goals that we want to achieve. But if we're going to at least get this human existence, that's the minimum. And that's what we had to do to create this life. Our past, existences in other lifetimes, we did that work, and that has brought us to this point. So at least use this life for that, as one of the messages we can get out of examining this from that angle of how difficult it is to attain this rebirth just on numbers alone. So again, continuing with this, there's where I was. Okay, entering the Bodhisattva way. Now we have a little quote from Geshe Potowa. Potowa was one of the great Kadampa masters that followed in the lineage of Lama Atisha about 1,000 years ago. He says, in Penpo, there was a fortress by the name of Shakar that had been seized by an enemy. For a long time, the villagers had been their unfortunate servants. One old man used to wallow in anguish about this fort, and when one day he heard people saying that it had been won back, it had been liberated, right? He grabbed his spear and, not able to walk, dragged himself along, saying, "If only the recapture of Shakar Fortress is not a dream." He was just so excited that this could come to pass, that there's this amazing, change of fortune that happened for this fortress, Shakar. In the same way, having won the freedoms and endowments, you must derive that kind of joy from it and practice Dharma. Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to talk about the joy that he sees in some ordinary beings, in the way that I think the example he used was really very cute. He talked about what they call football in Europe. He called it football. We call it soccer here in the US, right? Of like people like screaming up and down after they make a goal, and all of the excitement and energy they feel after just something like winning a game. He says we should be doing that every moment of our lives, having won this good rebirth. But that's the point, is that we have to really have this joy at having attained the existence that we have, because it's so rich with opportunity. And again, it's not something we should waste in the least. Okay. So as stated here, you should meditate to develop this kind of attitude. Now, this is kind of an interesting little set of points that Lama Tsongkhapa raises here. I didn't put this on the quiz. It's not something that we normally meditate on, but certainly we can see these are 4 main points that we need to have in our mind to make sure we do take the essence of this life. So Lama Tsongkhapa introduces this saying, 4 states of mind regarding the Dharma are necessary to generate a fully qualified wish to take the essence of this life that is endowed with freedom. Again, I've got a little footnote on there because there is more commentary on this in Geshe Sopa's book. If you're curious about that, it's pages 271 through 273. I know some of you have the Kindle version, so you might not be able to find it as easily, but you'll see this section that pertains to this part of our text. And again, you can, he says that it's good to do some analytical meditation on these points. So while these aren't our normal way of presenting this topic, we already saw that at the beginning of this chapter. Nonetheless, these are things that we do need to reflect on. First of all, that you need to accomplish the Dharma, because all sentient beings only want happiness and do not want suffering. And accomplishing happiness and eliminating suffering depends solely on the holy Dharma. Again, this is something that we haven't really covered as like a main point in terms of this chapter, but it's something that is the underlying motivation for why we're even here, why any of us are studying the Buddha Dharma, is because we've come to see that what it provides, the Buddha's path to attaining happiness and eliminating suffering, has some ground to it. It has some validity. And so because that's our situation, in order to achieve what we want to achieve, and for all beings to achieve that through, again, our being able to help them, it's only through the Dharma that that will be accomplished. The second point, that you are able to accomplish the Dharma because you have the external condition, what I mentioned earlier tonight, the spiritual teacher, and the internal condition, The freedoms and endowments. Again, we looked at the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments last week. They're all the points, the things we are free from in this existence that would be a hindrance to our practice, and then the things we are endowed with in this life that are a boon to our practice. Then the third point, that you need to accomplish the Dharma in this very life. Because if you do not accomplish it within this life, it will be difficult to obtain the freedoms and endowments for many lives to come. That we, at least have to use this life as best as we can to practice the Dharma. So that when we end this life, we are assured of having at least a good, again, continuity of existences that will allow us to continue our spiritual path. And then the fourth point is actually one that comes up in regard to the first topic we're going to look at in part 2, which is death and impermanence. Number 4, that you need to accomplish the Dharma right now because the time of death is uncertain. So it's kind of interesting that this point is thrown into this initial topic of perfect human rebirth. But that is one of the main points we have to get at some level, is that it's important that we don't think we're going to put off our practice of the Dharma and our study of the Dharma and our engagement in these teachings at a deeper level until some age in the future, because that may never come. Our death could come well before that. And any of us could die, tonight. This could be our last day in this existence. So how have we used this life to create at least the causes of practicing the Dharma for good rebirths, to eventually attain liberation, attain enlightenment, all the things that, again, will be important in terms of using this life well. So the third of those reasons, again, that you have to do it in this very life, stops the laziness of dismissing it, thinking I should practice the Dharma in later lives. Like, oh, I'll wait till I get another existence. This time I'm just going to have fun. Next lifetime I'll get serious. Well, you don't know that that's the case, right? The fourth one, that you need to practice it now, counteracts the laziness of not entering into the Dharma, thinking, although I must accomplish it in this life, it's enough to accomplish it later on and not in these immediate years, months, and days. You can also make these points into 3, subsuming the last 2 under the thought, I need to accomplish it soon, right? So accomplish in this life, accomplish it soon. Those are both kind of implicit in that idea of accomplishing it soon. Remembering death can also be linked in here, as I was just saying, but since that is a lengthy topic, it will be explained below, again, at the beginning of part 2, when we start on May 13th. That will be the first topic we're going to look at, is death and impermanence, to remind us that this life does not last forever. And again, the uncertainty of when it will end is always there. Then we have a little point. This is on the homework that you can take a look at and work with during our discussion at the end of tonight. The mind becomes more subdued if you contemplate the topic from various points of view. So you should contemplate in the way explained above. However, if you cannot manage this much, then subsume those topics, again, everything that we talked about in those 4 points, under these 3 points. What the nature of this life of freedoms and endowments is, again, that's what we talked about last week, the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. How it is so meaningful in terms of temporary and final goals. That's what we also covered last week, that I almost covered again tonight and did a little bit, I guess. So that's the second one. The third point it can be subsumed into is how difficult it is to obtain from the point of view of cause and result. We already looked at it to some degree from the point of view of numbers. Because again, the vast quantity of beings tend to fall to the lower realms, as Lama Tsongkhapa said in that passage earlier. So it says you should take up each of these points explained above in a way that suits you and meditate on them. I might mention that again, this is how the more traditional meditation on the perfect human rebirth is done in terms of those 3 points. Reflecting well upon the freedoms and endowments and what the meaning of that is, how that makes this life very meaningful. Secondly, meditating on the great value of this life so that we understand how it can be used in incredible ways, not just for temporal, but ultimate benefit and in every moment. And then again, the third, which is the difficulty of obtaining this in terms of causes and results, in terms of numbers, and there's even those analogies that are used. I might go ahead and share here. I think all of you have access again through the link at the website for this course. The Lamrim meditation outlines that were done for the Lamrim course at Lama Tsongkhapa Institute where I studied. I think these were put together by Venerable Sangye Kadro. But essentially, you see that there we have these laid out. And so you can use this as a meditation guide after tonight or even going forward, whatever, for the next several weeks or months or years, however you want to meditate on this. We have, again, the identification of the leisures or freedoms and endowments. There are the 8 freedoms. Again, there's some advice there about how to meditate on. There are the 10 endowments. You can meditate on those. The second point is the great value of a precious human life possessing the leisures and endowments. So again, we can look at, again, that, and there's some additional advice there about how we can use this life well. And then the great difficulty in finding it by way of analogy. Again, the analogy of there's the fact that there are many beings that are born in the lower realms, just like the grains of sand underneath the fingernail are the few that are actually born in upper realms after having exited from the lower or upper realms, and so on. And then again, there's the turtle and all of these various things. Then there's the causes for it are difficult to create, which we're going to look at now. And then the result itself is a rare entity. And again, there's some advice here about meditating on it. And so feel free to use that as an outline for your meditating on this topic. I just thought I'd mention that there. Let's go back to the text and carry on with the additional points that are made in terms of the difficulty in obtaining this life. Contemplate the difficulty. This is that yellow section. I don't know how well it's showing on the screen. Contemplate the difficulty in obtaining the freedoms and endowments from the point of view of the causes. And this is a point that is in your homework for tonight as well. Generally speaking, even to attain a mere fortunate rebirths again are the humans, the demigods, and the gods. In order to get one of those rebirths, you need to cultivate one of the pure virtues, such as what are found in our practice of ethics, the 10 virtues that are the opposites of the 10 non-virtues, engaging in wholesome actions in that vein. In particular, to attain the complete freedoms and endowments, you need to cultivate many roots of virtue, such as upholding a foundation with pure ethics, which is those 10 virtuous actions that we need to have to create the seed that will propel us into a good existence. But then secondly, reinforcing it through generosity and so on, which will allow us to not just get a human existence, but to have one where we have all the conditions complete to be able to use that life well. And then thirdly, maintaining a connection by means of stainless prayers. This is one of the important points that is set out in this idea of making a connection. Let me go ahead and click on the footnote for that. It says maintaining a connection between lives so that the next life builds on the virtues created in the present life without allowing them to become lost for a long time. So the point here is that we want to continue to create this continuity of good rebirths, and we do that primarily through creating these stainless prayers. The idea is that you actually have to make prayers to have an existence like this, which again is something that how many beings even think of doing? Well, that should be part of our daily practice, is trying to create the causes to make sure that we have a good rebirth through engaging in virtue, through engaging in not just the 10 virtues that will plant the seed for a good rebirth, but also the virtues of generosity, patience, and so on, that create ideal conditions for that human existence. But then thirdly, making prayers for that, actually setting our intention in that direction. Otherwise, the virtue we create could be used for a variety of other things, right? It could ripen into good conditions when you're a dog. I mean, we have many pets in our world, right, that have amazing conditions in terms of their getting lots of food and medical care and everything that they need, protection. But that's kind of wasting that karma on a dog existence, where it's not going to be used to the great benefit that we can in a human life. So we have to create these prayers that kind of go along with it, that create an understanding of kind of what's important, to make sure that when we get this human existence, we're actually going to be able to use it well. So again, contemplating the difficulty and finding them. Let me go ahead to this. This is kind of a little passage again from Liberation, where he talks about the difficulty in finding them in terms of the causes, thinking about the causes for its being so hard to acquire. Pabanka Rinpoche says, so your optimum human rebirth, this perfect human rebirth, which could be most beneficial, is extremely difficult to acquire. You do not receive it again and again. It's not like you're guaranteed of getting a human existence just by virtue of having gotten one this lifetime. Goes on to say, if it were not so difficult to obtain, you could let it now go by without using it meaningfully. Then, when you obtained it another time, it would be enough to make sure you use the next birth meaningfully. But this fully endowed human rebirth that you have received was created out of many causes and conditions. You have been lucky by virtue of your merit and the prayers you made. It will be difficult to receive the same thing in the future. And there's some analogies for doing this. Let me hold on to that. We'll come back to that. But we have to really get that the causes for this life are extremely rare. Because again, we're not just talking about being reborn as human, which still is a minority of the beings in this world. They say that the vast number of sentient beings in this world are in the oceans. We don't even go in the oceans to see all of these beings that are in the depths of the ocean and floating around in all of the water that covers the majority of this planet, right? Those are the larger number of beings. And of course, we include all the other animals in the air, in the ground, and what have you, on the ground. We have, vast number of beings that are in the animal existence in this world. Just getting a good rebirth as a human is wonderful, but to have the ideal conditions we talked about last week is extremely rare. Then there is kind of another meditation point, which is contemplating the difficulty in obtaining the freedoms endowments from the point of view of the result. Meditate on the fact that, compared to the beings in the lower realms, different in kind from us, even a mere fortunate rebirth seems beyond the limits of possibility. Again, as I was just pointing out, the vast number of beings in this world system are in the animal existence. They are not human beings, much less perfect human rebirths. And compared to the beings in the fortunate rebirths, the same in kind as us, those endowed with the fully qualified freedoms are extremely rare. Fully qualified, that footnote is indicating that that means they also have the endowments. So to have all 8 freedoms and all 10 endowments among the human lives is very rare. So it's rare to get a human existence based on the number of beings that are here in the result of an animal existence. But then when we look at even in the human life, there are very few beings that are actually in the category of being fully qualified with the freedoms and endowments. Then it goes on to say, Geshe Dolpa laid great emphasis on this. He said that all other dharma is brought forth by this understanding. As this is so, you should make an effort accordingly. And that's where this chapter ends in terms of the topic of a perfect human rebirth. Again, I've given you in the reading list many of the other texts that go into much, much more detail. This was Tsongkhapa's more abbreviated way of presenting this. Let me go back to my slides and just present the other topics that have to do with the analogies for the difficulty in acquiring it. We looked at the causes. This is another topic, the analogies that give us an appreciation for the numbers of beings that are reborn in a perfect human existence versus those who are not. Geshe Potowa again says in his analogies, grass on the roof of a tower, the neck of a turtle, which means the following. So he has several analogies, and you can find more in that text, Liberation of Your Hand, that's on your book list. Rebirths into the upper realms are generally as frequent as the grass that grows on the mountain slope. Of course, if you go to the mountain slopes, we're talking high elevation, like up in Tibet, there's nothing growing at the higher elevations, right? The rarity of grass growing on a mountain slope is extreme. But a human rebirth with all the freedoms and endowments is extremely rare as blades of grass on the roofs of houses. These houses on the mountains and what have you that would not be able to, have grass growing on them. The neck of a turtle means this, and I came on ahead and gave you the reference to it, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, pages 281 through 282. But essentially what it has to do with, and I was going to share the passage, but I think I'll just go through it briefly. The analogy that's used is if you had a blind sea turtle, and in this analogy, the entire earth is covered with water. Okay, so we think about this whole planet covered with water with no land. You have a sea turtle that's living at the bottom of the sea, and it only comes up for air once every 100 years. On the surface of the water, this whole planet covered with water, is a golden yolk that is floating on the surface And the idea of the turtle coming up blind and putting its nose, its head through the golden yolk and actually achieving that is the rarity in finding a perfect human rebirth, which sounds really outrageous. I mean, these kind of analogies make it sound like, oh my gosh, it's hopeless, right? Well, they're to give us an appreciation for what we do possess, not to make us totally depressed and think, oh, then it's impossible, you know, because this sounds like pretty outrageous again to achieve. We can achieve it. And Lama Tsongkhapa said so much, right, in that passage. You absolutely can do this. But this first topic that is really, again, we had the spiritual teacher and this one, these two preliminary topics, they're to really give us an appreciation for what we now possess. And again, as I said in beginning of part two, we're going to look at the fact that we may not possess those for that much longer. You know, we certainly know that we're going to die at some point, but we could die at any point. So we have to make sure that we use what we now have, these two main things, the external condition of a spiritual teacher and some guidance from the Dharma that we have met with in this life through amazing good fortune and karma, and this human existence that has allowed us to meet with the Dharma. You know, because again, if you're a dog in the room and somebody's teaching the most profound Dharma, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you know, giving amazing teachings, but you've got this dog body and dog mind, it might plant some seeds, but you're not going to be able to do much with those teachings that you gain in that lifetime. So again, that's the idea behind this example of the turtle. You're welcome to take a look at, there's different meanings for the parts of the analogy and all that. It's really quite interesting. But again, I thought it would be better for you just to discover that on your own. Also, it is difficult by nature to acquire. So these are the 3 points in regards to its difficulty that are often set out. The first one, again, was by causes. The second one was the analogies. And then the third one is by nature. And this was just that idea that we ran into already. Many beings practice non-virtue, few practice virtue. When beings leave their rebirths in the higher and lower realms, the vast majority go to the lower realms. I mean, it's just inevitable because they haven't done what they could have done in that life. They've created non-virtue. And as we'll see when we get to part two and we look at the teachings on karma, every time you create a complete negative path of action, one of the 10 non-virtues, you have planted a seed for an unfortunate rebirth. And at the end of this life, one of those seeds is going to come to fruition. If you planted a preponderance of non-virtue, guess what? That's the likelihood of what will ripen at the end of this life. If you planted more virtue, then that's more likely to ripen at the end of life. There are other factors that play a role, and we'll see that when we get to that part of the course. But nonetheless, this is the reality we're facing, is that if we have not used this life well, then the chances are we are going to descend to a lower realm. Just again, telling it like it is. It's meant to freak us out a little bit, but in a good way, so that we actually put our energy into engaging in the Dharma. Pabanka Rinpoche, oh, this isn't from Pabanka Rinpoche. This is final advice that I'm giving you from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And I mentioned that example of the soccer players, the football players. As I said at the beginning, if you think realistically about how excited so many people get about soccer and other sports heroes, it looks pretty crazy. So much effort for something so meaningless. The real heroes are those trying to practice Dharma, you know, those who are trying to tame their minds, who are trying to engage in virtue in a world that supports non-virtue and encourages non-virtue. Those are the real heroes, Rinpoche says. The real heroes are those trying to practice Dharma. There's no greater meaning in life than leading all sentient beings to peerless happiness. And the perfect human rebirth that we now have for this brief period gives us the ability to do just that. That is why we need to understand just how precious it is and determine never to waste a second of this rare and amazing opportunity. So that's where the slides end for Perfect Human Rebirth. That came from, by the way, this wonderful book that I'll show on screen here called The Perfect Human Rebirth that I don't know if it's still available in hard copy, but it's definitely available at Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, which is lamayeshe.com. Again, it's called The Perfect Human Rebirth, Freedom and Richness on the Path to Enlightenment. And if there's any cost to it, it should be minimal, but usually it's even those are free downloads often. But it's a wonderful set of teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche on this topic. Remember, for the spiritual teacher, we also had a set of teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche called The Heart of the Path. And for this one, we also have a rather lengthy set of teachings, commentary on that topic. So if these are topics you want to pursue further, you can certainly do that. They're not by any means required for doing this course because we have plenty of reading that we're doing just with the few things that we're using. So let's go on. We'll see if there are any questions on this topic. I want to at least do a little bit on the final topic of this section. Again, this part one of the middle length Lamrim, again, the text that we're using in this study. This is called the paths of the three types of persons. And we've already touched on this idea of the Lamrim and how it's structured. For those of you, again, who are coming in late or who've, had not had some understanding of this, we have, oh, wait, there is a question from Nan. We got a hand up from Nan. Before I go, do I need to get to you? Nan, do you need to unmute? Yeah, if you can unmute.
I unmuted.
Are we
So
hearing you
this
there?
regards the
Not hearing
idea
you in the
of
compa.
having,
That may be something I have to rectify, which means
can
I
you hear me,
have to get
Don?
out my Oh,
Can you hear me?
Pam, can you hold on to your question or maybe even put
Yes,
it in the chat
yes,
box? I'm sorry to make you do that,
yes,
but
I
we're
can.
not getting the
Yes.
volume here in the Gompa because of our technical issues. And I don't have my headphones with me. I left them in the other room. And I could listen on my computer, but if I put it on here, well, actually, what I can do, I can I'm going to turn off the microphone, Nan. Sorry. I just thought of a solution to this. I'm not very techy, but um, oh, you've got some headphones? Anyway, but let me try. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my speakers on my computer, and Nan, and then if you can talk, I'm going to turn off my microphone right now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Oops.
Okay. So this is about being angry at a bodhisattva.
hmm
So if we don't know who's a bodhisattva, it's kind of telling us not to be angry at anyone, right? Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let me put my microphone back on. Yes. Essentially, I mean that's one of the challenges, right? We don't know who's a Buddha or who's a bodhisattva. The person who we see even misbehaving might happen to be that, right? We don't know for sure that our appearances can be deceiving, as we saw when we looked at the topic of our spiritual teachers, even. So we have to be careful, right? So I don't know. Did you have anything more that you needed to share in regard to that, Nan?
In regard to that, no, but just so that you know that Hera and Gary have four very precious looking little dogs who are listening to you and hearing the Dharma tonight.
Good. I'm happy that's so, and I hope that I'm able to plant some positive seeds in their mind streams. So we'll see. It looks like Scarlett has one. Let me again. I'm going to turn off the microphone here, and then I'll turn on my speaker on my computer. So right now.
Hello. Hi everyone. So, can you just clarify something? I suppose the way it goes is we've been around since beginningless time. So, wouldn't that mean that all of us, like all of us who are humans right now, the over 8 billion of us, have been in the lower realms and all of the realms? And like the karma has expired, and then we might have heard the Dharma somewhere. And then here we are, human. I'm just curious.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good point, Scarlett. I mean, certainly this concept of beginningless time does kind of boggle the mind because invariably we've been in every single situation. We've been in every possible rebirth. We've been humans many times. We've been animals many times. I mean, if we look at the kind of the idea again that most of the beings tend to be in the lower realms, that's where, due to the proclivity to engage in non-virtue, that's where they've ended up. We probably have spent more, if you can quantify that, because it's beginningless. So what is more of infinity? But some larger portion of our lives have been in the lower realms. But we've always had some existences where we've had some virtues that we've created. And so, again, these virtues that are created are not wasted. We're going to see that when we get to the topic of karma. When we plant good actions on our mind stream, those things eventually do ripen when they meet with the proper causes and conditions. So, essentially, we go through these various iterations of existences, sometimes end up in the lower realms, and we're there for quite some time. And then something happens and ripens into a good existence. I mean, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was really keen. We were talking about dogs there receiving some imprints of the Dharma. He was really keen to make sure that we use this human life whenever we encounter a being who's in the animal realm to do something for them, to kind of plant some seeds on their minds that can become a condition for them to meet with the Dharma and to have the ripening of that good karma that's in their mind stream. Again, we all have those good karmas, negative karmas, what have you. Probably, again, a greater store of negative than positive, but we can cause those to ripen by various conditions. So if we've got, there's wonderful advice Lama Zopa Rinpoche gives about pets. If we do have pets in our home, well, then make sure that we do things that we can do for them. When you leave the house to go to work, put on your little speakers playing mantras, recitations of sutras, whatever. I mean, it sounds kind of nonsensical in some regard, but everything you do is going to imprint on their minds in some way, even if they're asleep, even if they're kind of lounging around and this sound is somehow entering into their mind stream. So this is the state that we've all been in. We've been in every single existence. We've been in the human existence before. No doubt we have met with the Dharma before, or we wouldn't be meeting with it again. But in those lifetimes, perhaps we didn't have an acknowledgement of the importance of that life, and we didn't use it well, and we ended up falling into lower realms, which again can take a while to ascend from. So that's the idea behind it. So let me just check with you, Scarlett, if there was anything else you wanted to share before we go on.
No, I'm good. Thank you very much. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, good. Thank you. So let's go forward with, if there's any other questions that you have, please hold on to them. There'll be another opportunity in about 20 minutes or so for that. But I did want to talk about, again, these three levels. Again, the three levels are three types of persons. The very first one is similar to that first value, right? That first value of this human life is we can get a good rebirth. Well, that's your first level of motivation you can bring to the teachings, is to at least want to use this life to attain a good rebirth. That's the first level of the stages of the path. Rinpoche would call this the person of least capacity. Meaning, if you're going to engage in a spiritual practice, at least have that capacity, that capability to use this life to create the causes for a good existence beyond this. The second level of the stages of the path is where we're looking at attaining liberation, which was the first of the ultimate values of this life. And there we look at the teachings on the Four Noble Truths and the situation that we're in cyclic existence, going from life to life. Even if we get a good rebirth, it's not satisfactory. So we want to be free from that once and for all. That's the second level of the teachings. And those two teachings, those two levels of teachings in the Mahayana perspective, those who want to achieve Buddhahood, not just their own liberation, those are kind of teachings we do still have to have. We have to kind of share those teachings with those who might have those lesser goals. You can practice the Buddha Dharma with simply a goal of gaining a good rebirth or with the goal of just your individual liberation. But those are not the final goal of the Bodhisattva, the being of the Mahayana. That's the third level, where you cultivate bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha for all beings, and you engage in the practices that lead to your attainment of a state beyond your liberation, the state of enlightenment, Buddhahood. So again, those are the three levels that we're talking about here. And so what's happening from here, you'll recall that when we introduced the topic of perfect human rebirth, we talked about it as having two outlines. One, identifying what it is and kind of acknowledging its value and so on. And then two, how do we use that life? How do we make sure we use this existence we have now in the most meaningful way? So essentially now we're looking at how do we use this life meaningfully? Well, of course, that means to practice at least engaging in these stages of the path, the three levels of the stages of the path. So that's kind of where we are with this very last chapter of this first part. It's going to extend into, of course, the remainder of the course, because the remainder of the course is looking at each of those three parts. We'll look at the first and second one in the next part, part two. We'll look at the third one in the remaining two parts, parts 3 and 4. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this chapter starts. It starts with, as I said, the second point of the outline, the way to take the essence of this life that is endowed with freedom and opportunity. This has 2 points within it, generating certainty with regard to the general presentation of the path, which is what we're going to deal with tonight and next week, and the actual way of taking its essence, which is the remaining courses, okay? The remaining 3 parts to this course. So the first one, generating certainty with regard to the general presentation of the path. This within it has 2 points. how all the Buddha's teachings are contained in the paths of the three types of persons. Again, the person of the least capacity, middling capacity, great capacity, and the reason for gradual guidance from the perspective of the three types of persons. So let's look at the first of that, how all the Buddhist teachings are contained in the paths of the three types of persons. We already saw something similar to this when we looked at the greatness of the teaching way back towards the beginning of the course, right? Because we saw that one of the values of the Lamrim is that all the Buddhist teachings are condensed within it. Nothing is left out. It's all seen as practices that are a part of an individual spiritual path to Buddhahood. So let's look at this paragraph in orange there. It says, everything the Buddha did was only for the welfare of sentient beings. Because the Buddha himself had bodhicitta, and bodhicitta is the mind that is intent upon achieving the welfare of all beings. From generating bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment in the beginning, through collecting the accumulations of merit and wisdom in the middle, to manifesting complete Buddhahood at the end. So everything the Buddha did from beginning to end was for the benefit of other beings, for the welfare of all sentient beings. His benefit was included in that, but essentially all beings were the scope of that mind and of that intention. So then it goes on to say, thus, all the Buddha's Dharma teachings, too, are only for accomplishing the welfare of sentient beings. That's what he was driven by to achieve, and that is what he teaches, is the way to achieve the welfare of all sentient beings. That being so, it says, the goal to be accomplished is the welfare of sentient beings, which has two levels. This is how we could often condense the welfare of beings into two categories and what our own welfare is that we are wanting to attain. The first one is the temporary one of higher states, or higher status, as it's sometimes called, higher rebirths, which of course is what we've already looked at in terms of the first level of the stages of the path. We want to at least use this life to attain higher states of existence going forward. The ultimate one is that of what's called definite goodness. Definite goodness is a term that's used to refer to the two more ultimate results, the ultimate result of individual liberation and complete enlightenment, Buddhahood. So you're not getting any new information here. You're just simply looking at another way of encapsulating the value of this life in terms of when it comes down to your welfare and the welfare of all beings, they're encapsulated into those two ideas, something that is more temporary, which is high status, high states of existence that we can achieve with this life. And then secondly, a more ultimate result. By ultimate, we mean more final. There's at least a certainty that we have with regard to that. Now, within that, again, we have individual liberation and enlightenment or Buddhahood. Individual liberation isn't a completely final result in and of itself because beings have Buddha nature. They have the potential to attain complete Buddhahood. But nonetheless, it is a result that the Buddha taught we can attain as sort of a way station, a temporary holding place where then we can go on to full enlightenment after that. Remember, the Buddha taught, there's two paths of the Hinayana and the Mahayana. The Hinayana has the goal of individual liberation. For those who practice it with that motivation, they can attain their own removal from samsara. They can get to that sort of way station, that kind of island midway between where you're coming from and where you ideally want to go to. They can kind of land there for a while with some alleviation of their suffering, so that then they can gather the strength to go the rest of the journey to full enlightenment. The Mahayanas, however, want to enter the path that leads to Buddhahood right from the beginning, to not, they kind of pass through their own individual liberation, but it is not something they see as a goal they really want to achieve. They want to achieve the goal of Buddhahood. So again, this is the idea behind that. If we take these two ideas, the temporal kind of goal of a high status, a good rebirth, and then the more ultimate goal of what's called definite goodness. Definite or certain because it's certain to continue. Once you attain nirvana, your own liberation, or once you attain Buddhahood, complete enlightenment, you're never going to degenerate from that state. It is certain goodness that will always continue. You will continue on. Again, those who have attained individual liberation will eventually enter the Mahayana path and go on to become a Buddha. Those who have attained Buddhahood continue to do the work for sentient beings. That is part of being a Buddha, helping them to get enlightened. So essentially, we have the yellow there, the temporary goal of the welfare of beings in terms of their higher states of existence, and then the ultimate goal of definite goodness. So let's look at the yellow one. It says there, all the teachings that pertain to accomplishing the first level, again, high status or high states, are included in the cycle of Dharma teachings for the person of genuine lesser spiritual capacity, or that is shared in common with the person of lesser capacity. So going back to the Lamrim, how is that one included? Well, it's a one for one thing. That goal of temporary goodness, of having, the good states of existence in the future, that's the first level of the stages of the path. Of the three levels of the stages of the path, the first one pertains to attaining that goal. Let's go on to what he says, continuing about that. And by the way, this is somebody who uses this life for achieving the happiness of good rebirth. You can use this life for achieving the happiness of this life. But as we see, that's not really Dharma practice. That's not what you want to do, is just walk away from this life having only experienced transitory pleasures. You want to at least create the causes for a good rebirth. So then it qualifies those people on the bottom of the screen there where it says those are special persons of lesser capacity. They do not act primarily for the rewards of this life. Instead, they pursue the excellence of higher rebirth in future lives. And try to achieve the causes of that. Now, there's a quote. Remember way back when we talked about the author of this text being Lama Atisha and his lamp for the path to enlightenment, which again he wrote after coming to Tibet about 1,000 years ago. In verse 3 of that is where this first level of the stages of the path is set out. Whoever pursues by any means the happiness of samsara only, just for their own benefit, should be known as the least of beings. So the happiness of samsara means the happiness of good existences. So if you use this life and want to achieve good rebirths, you can continue to do that. You can do that for as long as you wish. That's a goal in and of itself. But again, that's not the goal of the Bodhisattva. That's not something we would aspire to do. We want a good rebirth as a means to eventually getting to enlightenment. But nonetheless, that's the first level of capacity, the least capable being who, can at least use this life for that result. Now, as I said earlier, there are two kinds of definite goodness. This is the second way we talk about the welfare of beings. The first one, again, was that higher states of existence. And then the second one is definite goodness. The first one, in pink here, is the liberation that is a mere release from samsara. It's individual liberation. The second one is coined here as omniscience, which is referring to Buddhahood. When you become a Buddha, you have an omniscient mind. That's what allows you to help all sentient beings perfectly, because you know their past karma, you know their minds, you know what's going on for them. You're not like me sitting here saying words that I have no idea if everybody's really resonating with what I'm saying, if it's the right approach to these teachings. Buddhas can teach and can guide beings exactly according to their omniscient mind that knows those beings inside and out. So the first result that is definite goodness, it says here, all the teachings that pertain to the vehicles of what are called the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, usually translated as hearers and solitary realizers. These are contrary to what it says are being Pratyeka Buddhas. Buddha there is meant to be a realizer. They are not Buddhas. They are solitary realizers, which are a class of practitioners within the individual vehicle, the Hinayana. So the hearers and the solitary realizers are those who practice that path. So all the teachings that pertain to them are included in the cycle of Dharma teachings for persons of genuine medium capacity, or the teachings that are shared in common with persons of medium capacity. Again, they use this phrase on the previous one, right? Shared in common with persons of lesser capacity. The idea behind that we're going to see approached a little bit later. I don't know if we're going to get to it tonight. But again, in the Lamrim, we have these three levels, and our intention is always to get to the third level. That's why everything we do in this tradition is imbued with the aspiration to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. But to get there, you have to go through these other two levels. You have to kind of progress along the way. So these are teachings in common with the person of lesser capacity. These are teachings in common with the person of medium capacity. And then we finally arrive at the teachings that are unique to the person of great capacity. But we can't get there without the other two levels. Just like in our education system in the US, you can't make it to university without having gone through some level of intermediate school, high school, what have you, nor without the learning that happens in elementary school. You can aspire to go to university from a very young age, but without having trained your mind in those other levels, you have no capacity to be able to study at the university level. I'm talking in general. You might have some children who are born who are quite acute in their studies and understanding, but so this is the idea behind these when it mentions that term. But that's that second, for the second thing of definite goodness, that's the first one within it. Mere liberation, individual liberation that is a release from samsara for that person. Continuing in the section that's not highlighted there, it says persons of medium spiritual capacity develop disenchantment with samsara as a whole, what we often call renunciation, and they make liberation from samsara their goal for their own welfare, right? They are still working on their own welfare in a very self-compassionate way. I mean, they care about their own existence and their own ability to be free from samsara. So they say, therefore, they engage in its method, which are the three trainings, the three higher trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Again, we've encountered them before a couple of times, but essentially, yeah, those are the main means of achieving liberation. The verse that comes from Atisha's text is verse 4. In Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, he says, one who pursues only personal peace, turning away from the happiness of samsara, and desisting from evil deeds, is called a person of medium capacity. Again, Rinpoche would say the middle capable being. This is the second level of capacity we can have on our spiritual path, is where we wish to be free from our own suffering, our own samsara. It's an amazing accomplishment, but it's not the final goal. Again, the other form of definite goodness is in the orange here. There are two means of attaining omniscience or Buddhahood. The great vehicles of the secret mantrayana, secret mantra, the tantric path, and the perfection vehicle, the paramitayana. What we're studying in the Lamrim is the paramitayana. So we won't be going into much of tantra at all. It's mentioned at the very end of the text as well. But essentially you have two paths for attaining the state of Buddhahood. These two are contained in the cycle of Dharma teachings for persons of great capacity, the great capable being that has the aspiration to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, to attain the state of omniscience. So explaining that, Lama Tsongkhapa says, since persons of great capacity are under the influence of great compassion, they make enlightenment their goal in order to bring all the suffering of sentient beings to an end. Therefore, they train in the six paramitas, the perfections, and the two stages of Tantra, a generation and completion stage, and so forth. We have the verse from Lama Atisha's text, Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, verse 5 for them. One who, through their own suffering, yearns to bring an end completely all the sufferings, bring to an end completely all the sufferings of other beings, is said to be a superior being, the great capable being, right? That's again where we're aiming for. But there are two other levels of teachings that we also have to engage in, but can have their own practitioners. You can have persons, again, of least capacity. That's all they can do with this human life, is at least gain the causes for a good rebirth. And then they can also have people who simply want their own liberation. Ideally, we should want to aim for the ultimate, the final and most complete result of Buddhahood, enlightenment, omniscience. So let's finish this section and then I'll see if there are any other questions before we do our discussion. As stated above, the means by which these beings attain enlightenment are twofold. The perfections, the paramitayana, that vehicle, and the secret mantra vehicle, tantric vehicle. The classification of three types of persons is determined in many texts, such as the Compendium of Ascertainments and the Treasury of Abhidharma Auto-Commentary. Although persons of lesser capacity include both those who devote themselves to this life and those who devote themselves to future lives, this is about the latter. One should consider them as engaging in the unmistaken means to higher states. So this is just clarifying a little bit more of what we saw earlier back here when we looked at the very first result in yellow there, where it says that this is special persons. So actually, it's just below the yellow. Special persons of lesser capacity do not act primarily for the rewards of this life. Instead, they look to future lives. So again, that's at least what we're talking about here. If you use this human life again just for the pleasures of this life, as was pointed out earlier, you're really no different than an animal, because animals spend their whole life just trying to get what will be of some pleasure, some happiness, some relief from their suffering, through some safety, security, protection, food, shelter, whatever it is that they need. And if that's all that we're doing in a more advanced way, perhaps in the human existence, and that we have more advanced pleasures and comforts and what have you, but that's all we use this life for, well, then that's really not even a spiritual path. The spiritual path begins when we at least turn our minds towards our future existence. So that's what we mean by the person of the least capacity, the least capable being, that special person who actually wants to use this life not just to enjoy the pleasures of this life, but to let those go and abandon a non-virtue for the sake of achieving a good rebirth. Then we have again the two definite goodness of attaining liberation from one's own cycle of existence, and then the third one, the highest result of complete Buddhahood, which is the final welfare of all beings. It's said to be the final, there's one final vehicle. All beings eventually will attain enlightenment. That is their potential, as I said earlier, through having Buddha nature. And that is what ideally we should want to achieve from the beginning. So that's all I have time for tonight. Let me see, there's a couple minutes before we start our discussion. Any questions from folks online? Again, put your hand up if you do. That's the click on the bottom there with the react. Okay, we have Aaron first. Let me go ahead and turn off this and turn on my speaker. So right now, can you let's see. There we go. Oh, sorry, you muted again, Aaron. Can you try unmuting again? Thank you.
Did it work? Oh, okay. I gotta learn to use my phone here. Thank you. I just was wondering, I also listened to Dharma talks from Theravada teachers. So maybe this isn't the right place, and tell me if it's not the right place or time to bring this up. But what they usually say is that when there's enlightenment, there is nothing after that. And, so therefore there's no saving anybody else. And they, from their point of view, the sutras that they go by, they don't think that the Buddha ever said that there was a way to rescue other people. And if he would have if he could have, and those kinds of arguments. So I'm just wondering, where would I look to resolve those kind of questions between the two paths and the teachings or teachers?
Great. Thank you for that question, Aaron. It's kind of a tough one to completely address in a short way. I mean, essentially, we do have two branches of teachings that came from the Buddha's time of like 45 years of him teaching the Dharma. And the very first sort of wave of disseminating the teachings was in the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon is what's embraced, as I understand it. Again, I'm not completely familiar with everything in the Theravadan tradition, but that is the corpus of teachings that they tend to follow mostly, is the Pali Canon. And again, there's wonderful translations of the Pali Canon, and the teachings in the Pali Canon are very rich and very wonderful. I'm not in any way disparaging them, in the comments I'm going to make, but essentially that branch of Buddhism went to a lot of Southeast Asia and has continued to be what again is now known as the Theravadan tradition. Now, within those teachings, there's not as much oriented towards the Mahayana path. The Mahayana teachings were disseminated centuries after in the Sanskrit language. They're come to be known as the Sanskrit canon of the Buddhist teachings. And so those teachings, again, there was initially a lot of controversy in the whole Buddhist world around, were those really the teachings of the Buddha? Or are those really valid? And so on. According to the Sanskrit teachings, they are very valid, and they were set out by the Buddha specifically for bodhisattva disciples. Now, in the Pali Canon, they do reference bodhisattvas, and they do reference these beings, but you're right, they do tend to practice a path. They attain enlightenment and maybe are able to be a benefit to beings in that lifetime, by teaching the Dharma. But then when they end that life, that's the end of their existence as a Buddha. They, like the story of Buddha Shakyamuni arising from Prince Siddhartha, his whole path, and he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. So in the Pali Canon, it seems that the teachings embrace that idea that a Buddha is a figure that appears in the world very rarely and begins turning the wheel of Dharma to the beings in that world. But that's the extent of the benefit that that Buddha can attain or can achieve in regard to helping others. That's not the Sanskrit view. The Sanskrit view is that when you attain Buddhahood, you have a continuity of mind that goes on in the state of Buddhahood. And in that state, you're no longer embodied through the force of karma and delusion as you would be when you're in samsara. You take rebirth through your compassion to benefit others. And so you show aspects, you don't even have to take rebirth. You can sometimes just purely emanate in the world. It gets to be a little woo-woo, if you will, these ways that Buddhas can help beings. But that is a whole different teaching that's taught in the Sanskrit canon. That teaches definitely that Buddhahood is attainable by every single sentient being. And as I was saying, it's the final result for all sentient beings. Now, in terms of texts that can help clarify all of that, I mean, certainly when you go to the teachings in the Mahayana tradition, which includes Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and Chan Buddhism, and many of the teachings in the northern part of Asia and what have you that have been disseminated to the world, you do get that orientation of Buddhahood, and even within it, you might have some disagreements about what that all means and how it's all set out. We have a whole nother course that's called Tenets that goes into the philosophical underpinnings of all of these different traditions. But essentially, that is the view you're going to get. Over in the Mahayana, you're going to get that view that minds go on after this attainment of Buddhahood, even after the attainment of liberation. When you attain nirvana, I know that some of the teachings seem to talk about in the Pali Canon about that's kind of like extinguishing a flame. Like once you achieve that liberation, it's over. There's nothing. And of course, Buddha in the Sanskrit tradition, it seems that Buddha was setting out that mind is going to continue. Even when you attain liberation, there's going to be a continuity of awareness that eventually again will enter into the Mahayana path and achieve the full potential of Buddhahood. So mind can never really be destroyed, according to the Mahayana. You can't have an extinguishment of the mind because mind is always arising from previous moments of mind and can never be fully extinguished. We can have an extinguishment of what contaminates our minds that allow the minds to be pure, but cannot have an extinguishment of mind itself. So there's different approaches to it. And so it's hard for me I don't know if anyone is aware of a book that really sets out the whole debate between these two. Some of the more books that have been around for some time might talk about this kind of division between these two different views. Know that certainly within the Mahayana, as we see in the approach of the Lamrim, we're going to talk about this next week in the final class, we embrace what is taught within the Theravadan tradition and the Pali Canon. We see it as a necessary component in those first two levels of the stages of the path. Those are primarily the teachings we're looking at there, which include, again, the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. That's the very beginning of the Pali Canon, the very first discourse of the Buddha. So all of that is included and part of our practice, but we go on to include what the Sanskrit canon teaches, which is the potential we all have to attain Buddhahood. So again, I can't say I'm someone who has studied it and engaged in it, but I can't say to convince someone absolutely that one of these views is more correct than the other. But we have to embrace them both as valuable parts of our spiritual path. And certainly those who have a proclivity towards the Theravadan tradition and feel a richness of that can gain incredible things through their practice. It's not in any way discounting what they do there. That is an important thing for those beings who have that disposition. That's why the Buddha gave two branches of teachings, because some only have the disposition of wanting to attain their own liberation, which is a very noble goal. Others may have that predisposition to want to enter from the beginning, the Mahayana, and practice the path that leads to Buddhahood. So I don't know if I could say more than that at this time, but let me go ahead and mute again and see if you have any additional comments. So.
Oh, yeah, well, thank you very much. I guess this is kind of silly, but I was afraid of what if you accidentally did extinguish yourself and you couldn't go on? Because I'm interested in the Mahayana and being of benefit. because I really care a lot about, suffering. And is there a way that you could accidentally sort of check out? I mean, I'm nowhere close or anything like that, but I'm just wondering.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Aaron, for that follow-up question. It's said in the Mahayana, no, that again, because mind has continuity, every moment of mind arises from a previous moment of mind, and every moment of mind gives rise to a subsequent moment of mind. So you never can have an extinguishment of mind in its entirety. Again, you can extinguish or remove the impurities in the mind. And it's great that you have a disposition towards the Mahayana, wanting to benefit others. That's most of us who are gathered here have that as what's drawn us to this path, this path of the Mahayana, especially as it's set out in the Tibetan tradition. It gives, again, very precise teachings on how to attain this goal. So we have to, again, just acknowledge that no, we're going to continue as long as we keep having that motivation, this motivation of bodhicitta, keep engaging in the teachings as we progress through these levels of practice, and we'll eventually attain that goal. And when you attain that goal, it's still not over then. You have this completely free mind that has no longer anything that is bounding it and keeping it, somewhat limited. You have this boundless heart and mind that is going to be a benefit to all sentient beings and continue to do that until samsara is emptied. So that's the side of the Mahayana that we're engaging in this approach to the teachings. But as I said, we do go through the main teachings of the Pali Canon and the Theravadan tradition as the underpinning for how we also, of course, want to practice ourselves to some degree, but also how we can benefit others, how we can make sure that we take care of them in their spiritual path and what they need. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
We need to do our little discussion group. Those of you who have to leave, I know sometimes people can't stay for the extra, not quite a half an hour till 9 o'clock here in Santa Fe. We do want to give you an opportunity to do some dedication prayers. Make sure you take the advantage of doing that so that you dedicate all the merit from tonight. Those of you who can stay, I'll put briefly on screen the questions that we can work with during the discussion. The first two come from homework number 8. The last two there, how does Lama Tsongkhapa advise that you should contemplate taking the essence of this life endowed with freedom when the meditation is subsumed in 3 points? We talked about that tonight. What are the 3 main meditation topics that we should look at in terms of this topic of perfect human rebirth? Number 4, what are the 3 causes for obtaining a human rebirth with all 18 qualities complete? I also talked about that tonight. Let's go ahead and look at the other one then. I think I've got maybe 1, possibly 2 questions that I can share for you to work with in the discussion if you get to them from that one. And let's put that on screen. Sorry. Share. Okay. Given that the goal of all the Buddhist teachings, this is from homework 9, is to be accomplished is the welfare of sentient beings, please identify and briefly explain the 2 levels into which the welfare of beings can be subsumed. Recall when I talked about that a short while ago? How are the teachings for accomplishing those 2 levels included within the paths of the 3 types of persons within the Lamrim? So again, the 2 main results, and then how would you include what's encompassed in those in the 3 types of beings, the 3 levels of the stages of the path. And that's it. That's the only question you can really work with from there. I haven't covered the rest of it. So next week, we'll go into the final bit of this and cover the other 2 points. All right. So let's just take a little short stretch break. Those of you, again, who are leaving, be sure to dedicate, and then we'll come back into it and do our discussion. And Shayla will set that up for us so that we come back into the larger group at about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. Okay. Thank you all. See.
Okay.
Were there any questions or comments from what we talked about? Okay. Having to do my little. Let's just go ahead and conclude tonight with prayers, since it's kind of a hassle to go back and forth on this as well, because I have to change this every time one of you is talking. If you do have additional questions from tonight, please write them down, and next week at our final class there'll be an opportunity to ask them. But we will plan to finish the text next Wednesday. I don't think that's going to be a problem with what's remaining. And then again, I will give some advice on what's happening in the interim till we start part 2 on May 13th. So let's go ahead, and I may not be able to, oh yeah, I can't screen share at the moment. I'm not sure who's host. Are you host, Cynthia? If I can screen share, I can get the
Yeah, let
prayers on
me.
the, where is that? Here it is. Let me just get the prayers up. Okay, so let's go forward to the next screen and we'll do the dedication prayers together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Let's do the prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama's good health, long life, and the fulfillment of all his wishes. And as we recite this, think about all the other teachers, the gurus, spiritual guides that we have, trying to create the causes for all of them to continue to be in this world to benefit us and others. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then, as most of you, if not all of you, know, we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's passing, our spiritual director. I will actually be here on Monday night, from 5:30 to 8, to lead a special Guru Puja and other practice for Rinpoche's return. Apparently, his reincarnation has happened, according to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. They just have not yet identified this child to be able to, begin the process of incorporating them into the learning of the Dharma and what have you. So we're making strong prayers for all of that to be auspicious and everything to happen in the best possible way for the benefit of all beings. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And let's just do a brief dedication at the very end for the beings that we're holding in our hearts right now. All of us have beings who we know of who are experiencing obstacles or illness, or possibly who have died recently, or who might be even dying at this time. As well as there are places in the world right now where our hearts might be moved to want the suffering to cease. Places where there's war or harm from the elements, various other forms of suffering. Start with those, just really those beings that you already feel some opening of your heart towards them. And send this positive energy out to them so it frees them immediately from everything that is causing them suffering. And it also continues to bring them the causes of their well-being, leading them all the way to the fulfillment of their complete potential. And may all beings have these same results: complete freedom from suffering and the complete happiness, fulfillment of Buddhahood through what we've done here together tonight. Okay, thank you all for hanging in there through all these technical waves that we were dealing with tonight. And I will see you all next Wednesday, if not before then, at any of the other events that I'm involved with here at Thupten Oberling. So thanks so much. Thank you, Cynthia, for all your kind assistance. Everyone be well. Okay.